Before we begin, click like right now so you don't drift off without supporting this content, and so YouTube delivers more videos like this to you. You're about to enter a calm and fascinating journey about the Sumerians, presented in a light, fluid way that's perfect for your night, your rest, or that moment when you just want to relax while learning something genuinely interesting. This video was created to transform curiosity into mental peace. Here, you'll discover little-known details about one of history's most influential civilizations, facts about their innovations, daily life mysteries, cultural secrets, and key moments that shaped our world. Everything narrated in a calm, measured, hypnotic, and informative way, so you can absorb knowledge even with your eyes closed. Because learning can be simple, pleasurable, and quietly transformative. And before we continue, how is your mind today? Tired? Seeking focus? Trying to sleep, but thoughts racing? Maybe you just want peace while discovering something new? Whatever your situation, this video will accompany you to the end. No pressure, no anxiety, just pure, light knowledge. So take a deep breath, settle in, and let's begin our journey through the true history of the Sumerians. Part 1. The Dawn of Civilization. The Sumerians emerged in southern Mesopotamia around 4,500 BCE, in the land between two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates. This region, now modern-day Iraq, was flat, hot, and initially swampy. The Sumerians didn't just settle there. They transformed it. They drained marshes, built irrigation canals, and turned barren land into fertile fields. This wasn't random settlement. This was engineering on a scale never seen before. The word Sumer means land of the civilized kings in their language. They called themselves a black-headed people, a term found on thousands of clay tablets. Their cities rose from nothing: Uruk, Eridu, Lagash, Nippur. Each city was independent, ruled by its own king and protected by its own god. Uruk was the largest, home to perhaps 50,000 people by 2900 BCE. To understand this scale, 50,000 people was unprecedented in human history. Most human groups at this time numbered in the hundreds, maybe thousands. The Sumerians built the first true cities with walls, temples, and organized streets. Eridu, their oldest city, was believed to be the first city ever created by the gods. Archaeological evidence dates Eridu's temple to around 5,400 BCE. The Sumerians didn't just build homes. They built ziggurats, massive step pyramids. The Great Ziggurat of Uruk stood over 100 feet tall, visible for miles across the flat plain. These weren't tombs like Egyptian pyramids. These were temples, houses for the gods. Each ziggurat was dedicated to a city's patron deity. In Nana and Uruk, Nana and Uar, priests climbed the steep steps daily, bringing offerings to the gods above. The Sumerians believed gods literally lived in these structures. They left food, beer, and incense at the top shrines every single day. Their religion wasn't abstract. It was practical, transactional, routine. The ziggurat's base contained vast storage rooms for grain, oil, and wealth. Temples weren't just religious centers. They were banks, warehouses, administrative hubs. The priests controlled enormous economic power, perhaps more than the kings. Sumerian cities competed fiercely for resources, land, and divine favor. Border disputes between Lagash and Umma lasted for centuries. Wars were common, but they were organized with trained soldiers and bronze weapons. The stele of the vultures, carved around 2500 BCE, shows Sumerian soldiers in tight formation. They carried spears, wore leather helmets, and marched in disciplined rows. This wasn't tribal warfare. This was military strategy. The Sumerians invented the phalanx formation, later perfected by the Greeks. Their chariots, pulled by donkeys, were the first armored vehicles in history. By 3000 BCE, Sumerian civilization was fully formed. Cities, writing, government, warfare, art. Everything that defined civilization began here, in the mud and heat of southern Mesopotamia. Part 2. The Invention of Writing. Around 3400 BCE, Sumerian accountants faced a problem. Temple warehouses were overflowing with goods: barley, oil, wool, livestock. Keeping track mentally was impossible, so they pressed marks into soft clay with a reed stylus. At first, these were simple pictures: a circle for sun, a triangle for a woman. This pictographic system evolved rapidly over just a few centuries. By 3000 BCE, the marks became abstract wedge shapes, pressed at angles. We call this cuneiform, from the Latin cuneus, meaning wedge. Cuneiform could express not just objects, but ideas, sounds, grammar. The Sumerians had created true writing, the first in human history. This wasn't just record-keeping. This was the preservation of thought itself. Suddenly, knowledge could outlive the person who knew it. Stories, laws, prayers, receipts, all pressed into clay and baked hard. Over 500,000 cuneiform tablets have been discovered, and most are untranslated. The tablets reveal everything: shopping lists, love letters, medical prescriptions, mathematical problems. One tablet is a complaint letter from a customer named Nanny to a copper merchant. Nanny was furious about receiving the wrong grade of copper. Or, the letter, over 3,700 years old, sounds like a modern customer review. Another tablet contains the world's oldest known recipe, a stew made with beer and onions. Sumerian scribes trained for years in specialized schools called tablet houses. Young scribes copied the same text repeatedly until their handwriting was perfect. Being a scribe was prestigious, a path to wealth and influence. Scribes served kings, temples, and merchants, recording everything. The Epic of Gilgamesh, one of humanity's oldest stories, was written in cuneiform. Gilgamesh was a real king of Uruk around 2700 BC. His story, friendship, mortality, the search for immortality, still resonates today. The Sumerians also wrote the first legal codes, centuries before Hammurabi. The Code of Uruk, from around 2100 BCE, prescribed fines for specific injuries. If you broke someone's bone, you paid 1 mina of silver. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about compensation and social order. The Sumerians documented their astronomy on clay tablets with astonishing precision. They tracked Venus's movements, predicted eclipses, and named constellations. The zodiac, the division of the sky into 12 signs, originated with the Sumerians. They invented the 60-minute hour, the 60-second minute, the 360-degree circle. We still use their base, 60 mathematics, every single day. Writing transformed humanity from prehistoric to historic. Before Sumer, we can only guess a human thought through artifacts. After Sumer, we can read their exact words, thoughts, fears, and dreams. Part 3. Sumerian Innovation and Technology. The Sumerians weren't just builders and writers. They were inventors. The wheel, one of history's most important inventions, appeared in Sumer around 3500 BCE. The earliest wheels weren't for transportation. They were potter's wheels. Spinning clay on a wheel allowed potters to create perfectly symmetrical vessels quickly. Within a few centuries, the Sumerians attached wheels to carts. Suddenly, moving heavy goods became exponentially easier. The Sumerian wheel was solid wood, cut from a single piece or made from planks. Spoke wheels came later, but the concept, rotating on an axle, was purely Sumerian. The sailboat also originated in Sumer around 3500 BCE. Reed boats with square sails moved goods up and down the Euphrates. Before sails, boats relied entirely on human rowing against current. Sails harnessed wind energy, the first use of renewable energy in human history. The Sumerians invented the plow, transforming agriculture from subsistence to surplus. The cedar plow, depicted on tablet around 3000 BC, dropped seeds while tilling. This doubled efficiency and freed people for other work, art, craft, governance. Bronze metallurgy flourished in Sumer by 3000 BC. They combined copper and tin to create bronze, harder, sharper, more durable. Bronze tools, weapons, and sculptures define the era. The Sumerians created the first maps, drawn on clay tablets. One map from around 2500 BCE shows the layout of the state with irrigation channels. Another tablet shows a partial world map, with Babylon at the center. They invented the lunar calendar, tracking moon phases to organize agricultural cycles. 12 lunar months didn't quite match the solar year, so they added a leap month periodically. This system influenced later Jewish, Islamic, and Christian calendars. The Sumerians developed advanced mathematics, including multiplication tables and square roots. They calculated the area of irregular fields, the volume of cylindrical granaries. One tablet poses a problem about distributing beer rations, ancient algebra. They created the first schools, training scribes, priests, and administrators. Students learned reading, writing, mathematics, and proper behavior. School discipline was harsh. Beatings for poor performance were common. One student tablet includes a complaint. The teacher caned me for talking. The Sumerians brewed beer, considered a gift from the goddess Ninkasi. Beer wasn't a luxury. It was safer than water and provided daily nutrition. Workers received beer rations as payment, up to several liters per day. The hymn to Ninkasi is both a religious poem and a brewing recipe. It describes the process in poetic detail: malting, mashing, fermentation. The Sumerians had at least 20 different types of beer, varying in strength and flavor. They drank through straws to avoid the barley sediment floating on top. Elaborate straws made of gold and lapis lazuli have been found in royal tombs. Medicine in Sumer combined practical treatments with religious rituals. Clay tablets list remedies: wound poultices, fever treatments, dental care. They use salt, thyme, mustard, and willow bark. The latter contains aspirin. Sumerian doctors diagnosed illnesses by examining symptoms, urine, and patient history. Surgery was performed, including trepanation, drilling holes in the skull. Some patients survived, as evidenced by healed skull holes and skeletal remains. The Sumerians created standardized weights and measures for trade. The mina, shekel, and talent regulated commerce across city-states. Without standardization, trade would be chaotic and prone to dispute. They invented the contract, formalizing agreements on clay tablets. Marriage contracts, loan agreements, land sales, all documented and witnessed. One tablet records a prenuptial agreement from around 2000 BC. The Sumerians introduced the concept of interest on loans. Typical interest rates were around 20% annually, quite high. Debt was serious. Unpaid debt could lead to slavery. They built the first bridges, arching over canals to connect city districts. They constructed reservoirs to store floodwater for dry season irrigation. Environmental engineering allowed Sumer to support dense populations in a harsh climate. Part 4. Religion and Mythology. Religion saturated every aspect of Sumerian life. The Sumerians believed in hundreds of gods, each controlling different forces. Anu was the sky god, father of all deities. Enlil was a god of wind and storms, the most powerful after Anu. Enki was the god of water and wisdom, creator of humanity. Inanna was a goddess of love, war, and political power. She was fierce, unpredictable, and deeply revered across all Sumerian cities. The Sumerians didn't see gods as distant or abstract. Gods were present, active, demanding, and temperamental. If crops failed, a god was angry. If war was won, a god was pleased. Priests mediated between gods and humans, interpreting divine will. Temples received constant offerings: bread, beer, meat, incense, precious metals. The daily temple ritual involved washing the god's statue, dressing it, and feeding it. Yes, feeding the statue. The food was then consumed by priests. This wasn't deception. The Sumerians believed the god consumed the spiritual essence. The ziggurat temples were literally the god's earthly home. No ordinary person could enter the inner sanctum at the top. Only the highest priests ascended, delivering offerings and receiving omens. Dreams were considered messages from the gods. Professional dream interpreters analyzed symbols and predicted future events. The Sumerians also practiced divination through liver inspection. After sacrificing a sheep, priests examined the liver's shape and markings. Specific features indicated good or bad fortune for the king or city. This practice, called hepatoscopy, spread throughout the ancient Near East. Death and the afterlife deeply concerned the Sumerians. They believed in an underworld called Kur, a dark, dusty place beneath the earth. Everyone went there after death: kings, slaves, priests, criminals. There was no concept of heaven or moral judgment in the afterlife. The afterlife was bleak, a shadowy existence eating dust and clay. The dead were called those who eat dust. Proper burial rites were essential to prevent the dead from returning as vengeful ghosts. Bodies were buried with food, tools, jewelry, and personal items for the journey. The Royal Cemetery of Uruk, excavated in the 1920s, revealed astonishing burial practices. Kings and queens were buried with entire retinues, servants, soldiers, musicians. These attendants appear to have voluntarily consumed poison and joined their rulers in death. One tomb contained 74 bodies, all arranged in orderly rows. They wore elaborate jewelry, gold headdresses, lapis lazuli necklaces, carnelian beads. The famous standard of Uruk was found here, depicting war and peace scenes. The ram in a thicket, a stunning gold and lapis sculpture, also came from these tombs. Mythology explained the world's origins and humanity's purpose. In the Sumerian creation myth, the universe began with primordial sea, Namu. Nama gave birth to an heaven and Ki earth. Their union produced Enlil, who separated sky from earth, creating space for life. Humanity was created by the gods to serve them, to do the work gods found tedious. Enki and the goddess Ninhursag molded humans from clay mixed with divine blood. Humans were essentially laborers for the gods, a purpose both humble and essential. The Sumerians accepted this role without resentment. Service was honorable. The myth of Inanna's descent to the underworld is one of the earliest recorded stories. Inanna, goddess of love and war, descended to the underworld to conquer it. She passed through 7 gates, removing a piece of clothing at each gate. By the 7th gate, she was naked and powerless. Her sister, Ereshkigal, queen of the underworld, killed her. For 3 days, Inanna hung dead on a hook, and the world above withered. Enki fashioned 2 creatures to retrieve her, sprinkling her corpse with life-restoring water. Inanna returned, but underworld lore required a substitute. She chose her husband, Dumuzi, who had failed to mourn her death. Dumuzi fled, but was eventually caught and dragged below. His sister offered to take his place for half the year. This myth explains the seasonal cycle: fertility and barrenness, life and death. The Epic of Gilgamesh explores friendship, mortality, and the human condition. Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, was 2/3 god, 1/3 human. He was arrogant, oppressive, and consumed by restless energy. The gods created Enkidu, a wild man, to challenge Gilgamesh. After a fierce wrestling match, they became inseparable friends. Together, they journeyed to the cedar forest to slay the monster Humbaba. They succeeded, but angered the gods by killing the divine guardian. The goddess Inanna proposed marriage to Gilgamesh, but he rejected her. Furious, Inanna sent the bull of heaven to destroy Uruk. Gilgamesh and Enkidu killed the bull, further enraging the gods. As punishment, the gods decreed Enkidu must die. Enkidu's slow, painful death devastated Gilgamesh. For the first time, the mighty king confronted his own mortality. Terrified of death, Gilgamesh embarked on a quest for immortality. He sought Utnapishtim, the only human granted eternal life by the gods. Utnapishtim survived a great flood by building a boat and saving animals. Yes, this flood story predates the biblical Noah by over 1,000 years. Utnapishtim told Gilgamesh that immortality was a divine gift, not earned. He offered Gilgamesh a test. Stay awake for 7 days. Gilgamesh immediately fell asleep, proving he couldn't even conquer sleep, let alone death. Utnapishtim gave him a consolation, a plant that restores youth. Gilgamesh retrieved the plant from the ocean floor, planning to share it with Uruk's elders. On the journey home, while bathing, a serpent stole and ate the plant. The snake shed its skin, renewed, while Gilgamesh returned home empty-handed. The epic ends with acceptance. Gilgamesh realized immortality comes through legacy. His walls, his city, his deeds would outlive him. This existential acceptance is profoundly human, resonating across millennia. Part 5. Daily Life in Sumer. What was it actually like to live in ancient Sumer? Let's step into a typical day in the city of Uruk, around 2000 BCE. The sun rises over the flat Mesopotamian plain, already warming the mud brick houses. Most Sumerians lived in small, rectangular homes built around a central courtyard. Walls were thick mud brick, providing insulation from heat. Roofs were flat, made of reeds and packed mud. Families often slept on the roof during hot summer nights. Homes had few windows, small and high to keep out heat and dust. The wealthiest families had 2-story houses with multiple rooms. Indoor plumbing didn't exist, but houses had drainage channel for waste. Water came from the river or communal wells, carried in clay jars. Women typically fetched water early in the morning before heat peaked. The Sumerian diet was based on barley, the staple grain. Barley was ground into flour for bread or fermented into beer. Bread came in dozens of shapes and types. Flatbreads, round loaves, filled pastries. Dates were abundant, providing natural sweetness and concentrated energy. Onions, leeks, garlic, lentils, and chickpeas added flavor and nutrition. Fish from the rivers supplemented protein intake. Meat, mutton, goat, pork, was expensive, reserved for special occasions. The wealthy ate meat regularly, the poor rarely. Milk, cheese, and yogurt from goats and sheep were common. Honey was rare and precious, used sparingly in special dishes. Spices and herbs, cumin, coriander, mustard, flavored food. Meals were eaten sitting on the floor, using fingers or pieces of bread as utensils. Clay bowls and cups were universal, from the poorest to the richest households. Clothing was simple and practical. Most people wore khanaks, a garment made of wool or linen. The khanaks looked like overlapping strips or tufts, resembling fleece. Men typically wore a short skirt or wrap around the waist. Women wore longer garments covering from shoulder to ankle. Wealthy individuals added fringes, embroidery, and dyed fabrics. Purple and red dyes were especially prized and expensive. Jewelry was common: necklaces, bracelets, rings, earrings. Both men and women wore jewelry, the amount indicating wealth and status. Materials ranged from simple copper to gold, lapis lazuli, and carnelian. Children played with toys, clay dolls, animal figurines, spinning tops. Board games were popular among adults, including the royal game of UR. This game, played with dice and markers, is over 4,500 years old. A complete game board with rules was found in a tomb. The rules are understood today, and people still play it. Education was reserved for boys from wealthy families. At age 7 or 8, boys entered the tablet house, the scribal school. Days were long, starting at dawn and continuing until evening. Students practiced writing on clay tablets, which could be smoothed and reused. Discipline was strict. Mistakes or misbehavior resulted in beatings. One student tablet records, "I was caned for my shoddy work." After years of training, successful students became scribes, priests, or administrators. Most children, however, learned their parents' trade: farming, pottery, weaving, carpentry. Women's roles varied by class, but centered on household management. Women could own property, run businesses, and engage in legal transactions. Some women were priestesses, wielding significant religious authority. The most famous was Enheduanna, daughter of King Sargon of Akkad. She was high priestess of the moon god Nanna in Ur. Enheduanna was also the world's first named author, writing hymns and poems. Her works survived because they were copied and studied for centuries. Marriage was arranged by families, often for economic or political alliances. A bride price was paid by the groom's family to the bride's family. The bride brought a dowry, which remained her property. If divorced, the woman kept her dowry, providing financial security. Divorce was possible and not heavily stigmatized. Women could initiate divorce under certain conditions, such as abandonment or abuse. Children were valued, and families typically had several. Infant mortality was high, perhaps 30 to 40%. Parents named children after gods, praying for divine protection. Names like Enlil's My Strength or Gift of Inanna were common. Illness was attributed to demons, angry gods, or witchcraft. Healing combined herbal remedies with incantations and rituals. Physicians and exorcists often worked together on difficult cases. Some remedies were effective: willow bark for pain, honey for wounds. Others were purely symbolic: amulets, prayers, ritual washing. Worked to find most people's lives. Farmers worked the fields during planting and harvest, then maintained irrigation canals. Canal maintenance was mandatory labor, organized by the temple or king. Artisans, potters, weavers, metalworkers, carpenters, worked in specialized workshops. Markets buzzed with activity, traders selling goods from distant lands. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, carnelian from India, cedar from Lebanon. Merchants traveled dangerous routes, risking bandits and harsh terrain. Successful merchants grew wealthy and influential, lending money and financing ventures. Slavery existed, but it was different from later forms. Slaves were prisoners of war, debtors, or criminals. They could own property, earn money, and eventually buy their freedom. Some slaves held skilled positions, working as scribes or overseers. Slavery was a legal status, not a racial or ethnic category. Entertainment included music, dance, and storytelling. Musicians played lyres, harps, drums, and flutes. The Sumerian lyre, with its beautiful bull's head decoration, is iconic. Songs range from religious hymns to love songs to work songs. Festivals marked the agricultural calendar and honored specific gods. The New Year Festival, a Akitu, celebrated the renewal of kingship and the gods' triumph over chaos. It lasted several days and involved processions, sacrifices, feasts, and public dramas. The king participated in a ritual marriage with a priestess representing Inanna. This symbolic union ensured fertility for the land and prosperity for the people. Public spaces included temples, palaces, markets, and open squares. Streets were narrow, unpaved, dusty in summer and muddy in winter. Donkeys, carts, and foot traffic created constant noise and activity. City walls provided security, gates closing at night. Guard towers watched for approaching armies or bandits. Life was communal. Privacy, as we understand it, barely existed. Extended families lived together. Neighbors knew each other's business. Reputation mattered enormously in this tight-knit society. Honor, honesty, and fulfilling obligations were essential virtues. Part 6. Government and Law. Sumerian cities were independent city-states, each with its own government. At the top was the king, called a Lugal, meaning big man. The king wasn't considered divine during his lifetime, unlike Egyptian pharaohs. He was, however, chosen by the gods and ruled with divine approval. The king's primary duties were maintaining order, defending the city, and pleasing the gods. If he failed, the gods might withdraw their favor, bringing disaster. Kings built temples, led armies, organized canal maintenance, and judged disputes. Royal inscriptions emphasized piety, justice, and military success. Kings often claimed to restore order after chaos or defeat enemies threatening civilization. Below the king was a complex bureaucracy of officials and administrators. The temple hierarchy held immense power, sometimes rivaling the king. High priests controlled vast temple estates, employing thousands. Temples owned fields, workshops, herds, and even entire villages. Temple workers received rations, barley, oil, wool, in exchange for labor. This wasn't capitalism or feudalism. It was a redistributive economy. The temple collected surplus and redistributed it to maintain the workforce. City councils, composed of elders and prominent citizens, advised the king. In some cities, the council held significant authority, especially in early periods. Lagash, around 2500 BCE, was ruled by a governor called an ensi under the council's authority. Royal power grew over time, but councils remained important. Legal codes regulated behavior and prescribed punishments. The Code of Ur-Nemu, from around 2100 BCE, is the oldest known law code. It prescribed monetary fines for various offenses rather than physical punishment. For example, if a man cut off another man's foot, he paid 10 shekels of silver. If he broke another's bone, he paid 1 mina of silver. This system emphasized compensation and social harmony over revenge. Murder, however, was punishable by death. Kidnapping, robbery, and adultery also carried severe penalties. Slavery as punishment for debt was regulated. Terms and conditions were specified. Contracts governed most transactions: loans, sales, marriages, adoptions. Witnesses signed contracts, and scribes recorded them on clay tablets. If a dispute arose, the contract was produced as evidence. Courts existed, and judges heard cases publicly. Evidence included witness testimony, written contracts, and sometimes oaths. Swearing an oath by God was serious. False oaths invited divine punishment. Trial by ordeal was occasionally used when evidence was unclear. The accused might be thrown into the river. If they survived, they were innocent. This seems barbaric, but reflected deep belief in divine justice. Property rights were clearly defined and fiercely protected. Land ownership was recorded, boundaries marked, and disputes adjudicated. Irrigation rights were particularly contentious, as water was life. Theft of water or sabotage of another's canal could lead to severe punishment. Women had legal rights, though less than men. Women could own property, inherit wealth, and initiate legal action. A widow inherited her husband's property if there were no adult sons. Daughters received dowries, which remained theirs even if widowed or divorced. Adoption was common and legally recognized. Childless couples adopted to ensure care in old age and continuation of family rituals. Adopted children had the same rights as biological children. Temples also adopted children, training them as priests or workers. Taxation supported the state and temple infrastructure. Farmers paid a portion of their harvest. Artisans contributed goods or labor. Merchants paid tariffs on imported goods. Tax evasion was difficult in such a tightly controlled society. Military service was mandatory for able-bodied men during times of war. The king could summon levies from all city districts. Professional soldiers, better trained and equipped, formed the core of the army. Veterans received land grants and conquered territories as payment. Warfare between city-states was frequent but not total. Battles were often ritualized, and treaties ended conflicts. Victorious kings imposed tribute, grain, livestock, precious metals. Conquered cities might lose independence temporarily, but retain their identity. One famous conflict was a war between Lagash and Umma over a fertile border region. This dispute lasted generations, flaring up repeatedly despite treaties. The Steel of the Vultures commemorates a Lagash victory, showing vultures devouring enemy corpses. Diplomacy was practiced, and messengers traveled between cities carrying treaties. Royal marriages sealed alliances between rival city-states. Gift exchanges between kings demonstrated friendship and mutual respect. Letters on clay tablets revealed diplomatic correspondence, discussing trade, marriage, and grievances. The king's image was carefully cultivated. Victories steelly depicted kings as mighty warriors crushing enemies. Inscriptions proclaimed their building projects and piety. Royal propaganda was essential to maintaining authority and divine favor. Part 7. Art and Culture. Sumerian art was functional, symbolic, and deeply religious. Nearly all surviving art comes from temples, tombs, or palaces. Sculptures depicted gods, kings, priests, and worshippers. The Sumerians used materials like limestone, alabaster, basalt, and diorite. One iconic form is the votive statue, a worshipper with hands clasped in prayer. These statues were placed in temples, perpetually praying on behalf of the donor. The figures have enormous eyes, symbolizing awareness of the divine. Their simple, cylindrical bodies emphasize the spiritual over the physical. Kings commissioned statues showing themselves in pious poses, offering gifts to gods. The statue of Gudea, ruler of Lagash, is one of the finest examples. Gudea is shown seated, calm, humble, with an inscription praising the gods. Multiple statues of Gudea have been found, suggesting his reign was prosperous and peaceful. Cylinder seals were small, carved stone cylinders used to mark ownership. When rolled across wet clay, they left a detailed image. Seals depicted gods, animals, mythological scenes, and geometric patterns. Each person's seal was unique, functioning as a signature. Seals were worn as jewelry, hung on cords around the neck. Thousands have survived, providing a visual record of Sumerian iconography. Common motifs include the contest scene, heroes or gods battling monsters. The hero Gilgamesh appears frequently, wrestling lions or bulls. Inanna is shown with wings, surrounded by symbols of power and fertility. Enki is depicted with streams of water flowing from his shoulders. These images weren't decorative. They communicated identity, allegiance, and divine favor. Pottery in Sumer was both utilitarian and artistic. Early pottery was hand-built and simple. After the invention of the potter's wheel, production became faster and more uniform. Some ceramics were elaborately painted with geometric or animal designs. Large storage jars, some over 3 feet tall, held grain, oil, or water. Metalwork reached extraordinary levels of skill. The royal cemetery of Uruk yielded gold daggers, helmets, and jewelry. The gold helmet of Mescalamdug is a masterpiece, shaped like a wig with individual strands detailed. It weighs over a pound of pure gold. Lapis lazuli, imported from Afghanistan, was carved into beads, seals, and inlays. The standard of Uruk is a wooden box inlaid with shell, lapis, and red limestone. One side shows war, soldiers, chariots, prisoners. The other side shows peace, banquets, musicians, tribute bearers. This duality reflects Sumerian life, the necessity of war and the ideal of peace. Music was integral to Sumerian culture. Lyres, harps, and flutes accompanied religious ceremonies, banquets, and funerals. The great lyre from Uruk had a golden bull's head and was beautifully decorated. Musicians held respected positions, especially temple musicians. Hymns to the gods were sung, not just recited. Enheduanna's hymns were meant to be performed with musical accompaniment. Literature flourished, preserved on countless tablets. Besides myths and epics, the Sumerians wrote proverbs, debates, and lamentations. Sumerian proverb sounds surprisingly modern. A scribe who doesn't know Sumerian, what kind of scribe is he? Another, he who eats too much will not be able to sleep. Debate poems featured 2 entities arguing superiority. Summer versus winter, farmer versus shepherd. These debates explored societal values through dialogue. Lamentation texts mourn the destruction of cities, especially after invasions. The lamentation over the destruction of Uruk is heartbreaking. It describes the Elamite invasion around 2000 BCE, the slaughter, the burning. The goddess Ningal weeps for her city, but the other gods refuse to intervene. The text reflects real trauma, collective grief preserved in poetry. Architecture was monumental and symbolic. Ziggurats dominated city skylines, asserting divine presence. Palaces were vast complexes with throne rooms, administrative wings, and storage areas. Walls were decorated with mosaics of colored clay cones pressed into mud brick. These formed geometric patterns, adding visual interest to otherwise plain surfaces. Gates were massive, often flanked by guardian statues, lions, bulls, or mythical creatures. The Sumerians valued order, symmetry, and grandeur in their buildings. Gardens, especially date palm groves, were cultivated within city walls. Date palms provided shade, fruit, and wood, a vital resource. Some wealthy estates had private gardens with pools and exotic plants. Textiles were another important art form. Wool from sheep was spun, dyed, and woven into cloth. Garments ranged from simple wraps to elaborately patterned robes. Weaving was primarily women's work, done at home or in temple workshops. Dyed textiles, especially reds and purples, were luxury items. Trade in textiles connected Sumer to distant regions. Sumerian culture emphasized hierarchy, order, duty, and piety. Art reflected these values, depicting rulers, gods, rituals, and cosmic order. Beauty was appreciated, but always within a framework of meaning and function. Part 8. The Decline of Sumer. Sumerian civilization didn't end suddenly. It gradually transformed. Around 2300 BC, Sargon of Akkad conquered the Sumerian city-states. Sargon was a Semitic speaker, not ethnically Sumerian. He unified Mesopotamia under the Akkadian Empire, the first true empire in history. Akkadian became the administrative language, though Sumerian remained in religious use. The Akkadian Empire lasted about 150 years before collapsing. Invasions by the Gutians, a mountain people, destabilized the region. The Gutians ruled for about a century, a period remembered as chaotic. Around 2100 BCE, the city of Ur reasserted dominance under the third dynasty of Ur. This period, called the Ur-III period, was a Sumerian renaissance. Kings like Ur-Nammu and Shulgi centralized power, standardized administration, and built extensively. Ur-Nammu's law code and the great ziggurat of Ur date to this era. Shulgi claimed to run 100 miles in a single day to visit 2 temples. Whether true or propaganda, it illustrates the era's ambition and energy. The Ur-III state was highly bureaucratic, with detailed record-keeping. Tens of thousands of administrative tablets from this period survive. They document everything: rations, labor assignments, livestock counts, textile production. This was the most organized society in Mesopotamia up to that point, but the system was rigid and vulnerable to disruption. Around 2000 BCE, the Elamites from what is now Iran invaded. They sacked Ur, destroying the city and carrying off the king. The lamentation texts describe a horror: fires, bloodshed, temples desecrated. The Ur-III state collapsed, and Sumer never recovered politically. Regional powers, Isin, Larsa, Babylon, competed for dominance. By 1800 BCE, Babylon under Hammurabi became the region's superpower. Hammurabi's famous law code drew heavily on earlier Sumerian codes. The Sumerian language gradually ceased to be spoken. Akkadian dialects, especially Babylonian, replaced it in daily life. However, Sumerian remained the sacred language of religion and scholarship. Scribes studied Sumerian for over 1,000 years after it died as a spoken language. It was like Latin in medieval Europe, dead but essential for educated elites. The Sumerians' contributions didn't vanish. Their myths influenced later Babylonian, Assyrian, and Hebrew traditions. The flood story in the Epic of Gilgamesh resembles the biblical Noah. The concept of divine assembly appears in both Sumerian and Hebrew texts. The 7-day week, the zodiac, and base, 60 mathematics, all originated in Sumer. Cuneiform writing continued in use for 3,000 years after Sumerian died. The last cuneiform tablet was written in the 1st century CE. By then, alphabetic scripts had replaced cuneiform, and the knowledge of reading it vanished. For over 2,000 years, cuneiform was unreadable, a mystery. In the 19th century, scholars like Henry Rawlinson deciphered it using trilingual inscriptions. Suddenly, Sumerian voices could be heard again after millennia of silence. Archaeology began uncovering Sumerian cities in the late 1800s. Sites like Uruk and Nippur revealed astonishing artifacts and texts. Leonard Woolley's excavation of the Royal Cemetery of Ur in the 1920s captivated the world. The treasures, gold, lapis, intricate craftsmanship, prove the Sumerian sophistication. Today, over 500,000 cuneiform tablets have been recovered. Most remain untranslated, sitting in museums and universities worldwide. Each tablet is a voice from the past, waiting to be heard. Modern Iraq, which encompasses ancient Sumer, has faced turmoil. Wars, looting, and neglect have damaged archaeological sites. Priceless artifacts have been stolen or destroyed. The loss is incalculable, not just for Iraq, but for all humanity. Yet Sumerian legacy endures in unexpected ways. Every time you check the time, you use their base 60 system. Every time you read a contract, you engage in a practice they invented. Every time you follow a written recipe or read a story, you walk a path they first cleared. The Sumerians transformed humanity from prehistory into history. They asked the big questions. Why are we here? What happens after death? How should we live? Their answers, preserved in clay, still resonate. Part 9. Sumerian Legacy and Influence. The Sumerians were the architects of civilization. Almost everything we associate with advanced society began with them. Writing, cities, law, schools, literature, government, bureaucracy, trade, all Sumerian innovations. When later cultures rose, Babylonians, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, they built on Sumerian foundations. The Babylonians adopted cuneiform and Sumerian literary traditions. Hammurabi's code, famous for an eye for an eye, was inspired by Sumerian law. Babylonian myths, like the Enuma Elish creation story, echo Sumerian originals. The Assyrians, fierce warriors and empire builders, revered Sumerian culture. Assyrian kings collected Sumerian texts, preserving them in royal libraries. The library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh contained thousands of Sumerian tablets. When Nineveh fell in 612 BCE, these tablets were buried, protecting them for millennia. The Persians, who conquered Mesopotamia in the 6th century BCE, respected its ancient traditions. Cyrus the Great, founder of the Persian Empire, honored Babylonian customs rooted in Sumerian heritage. The Hebrew Bible shows clear Sumerian influence. The Genesis flood story parallels the Sumerian Ziusudra and Akkadian Utnapishtim myths. The concept of a 7-day creation echoes Sumerian cosmology. The Tower of Babel story may reference Mesopotamian ziggurats. Jewish scholars likely encountered these traditions during the Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE. Greek historians, like Herodotus, wrote about Mesopotamian marvels. Greek astronomy and mathematics borrowed from Babylonian sources, which inherited from Sumerian knowledge. The Greek division of the circle into 360 degrees comes directly from Sumerian base, 60 math. Islamic scholars during the Golden Age studied ancient Mesopotamian texts. They preserved and transmitted this knowledge to medieval Europe. The Renaissance rediscovery of classical learning included ancient Near Eastern wisdom. Modern mathematics, astronomy, and law all have roots in Sumerian innovation. Concepts of justice, evidence, and written contracts are foundational to legal systems worldwide. The idea that laws should be written, public, and apply to everyone began in Sumer. Before Sumer, justice was arbitrary, based on memory, tradition, and power. After Sumer, justice could be codified, studied, and refined. Literature as we know it, stories with themes, characters, and moral complexity, began in Sumer. The Epic of Gilgamesh explores mortality, friendship, and legacy. These themes are universal, timeless, and profoundly human. Gilgamesh's quest for immortality mirrors our own existential struggles. His acceptance of death and focus on legacy resonates today as it did 4,000 years ago. The structure of cities, walls, gates, streets, public squares, temples, originated in Sumer. Urban planning, the organization of dense populations, and public works all began there. Modern cities, for all their complexity, follow patterns first established in Uruk. The concept of the state, a political entity with defined territory, government, and laws, was Sumerian. Before Sumer, human organization was tribal, kinship-based, fluid. After Sumer, the state became the dominant form of social organization. Schools, the systematic education of the young, began in Sumer's tablet houses. The Sumerians understood that knowledge must be transmitted deliberately, not just casually. They created curricula, trained teachers, and graduated professionals. Modern education systems, despite their differences, echo the Sumerian insight. Trade networks, based on standardized weights, contracts, and money, began in Sumer. The shekel, originally a unit of weight, became a basis for currency. Global trade, with all its complexity, has Sumerian DNA. Even our concept of time, hours, minutes, seconds, is Sumerian. The 60-minute hour, the 60-second minute, the 24-hour day, all Sumerian innovations. We live by Sumerian time every single day without realizing it. The zodiac, astrology, and astronomy owe debts to Sumerian stargazing. They named constellations, tracked planets, and predicted celestial events. Modern astronomy, despite being scientific, still uses Sumerian constellation names. Beer, one of humanity's favorite beverages, was perfected in Sumer. They brewed it, celebrated it, and paid workers with it. The next time you drink beer, thank the Sumerians. The wheel, one of history's most transformative inventions, changed everything. Transportation, pottery, milling, all transformed by this simple innovation. It's impossible to overstate the wheel's importance, and it came from Sumer. Irrigation engineering allowed agriculture in arid regions, supporting large populations. The Sumerians turned desert into farmland through ingenuity and labor. This model, human engineering overcoming environmental challenges, shaped civilization. The Sumerians also gave us the concept of the professional, the scribe, the priest, the soldier, the merchant. Before Sumer, roles were fluid. After Sumer, specialization became the norm. Professional expertise, credentials, and training all began there. The Sumerians even influenced our language. Many English words have roots in Sumerian-derived terms via Akkadian, Hebrew, and Greek. Words like alcohol, derived from Arabic, which borrowed from earlier Semitic languages, trace back to Mesopotamian terminology. The Sumerians were the first to record history. Before them, history was oral, changeable, mythologized. After them, history was written, fixed, and subject to analysis. We are historians because the Sumerians were. Their texts, administrative, literary, legal, are the first historical documents. Without them, the ancient world would be silent. The Sumerians also created the first epic heroes, Gilgamesh, Enkidu, Inanna. These characters inspired countless later heroes in myth and literature. The hero's journey, the quest, the tragic flaw, all explored first in Sumerian texts. Modern storytelling, from novels to films, follows narrative structures pioneered in Sumer. The Sumerians asked the foundational questions. Why do we suffer? What is justice? What happens after death? They didn't always find answers, but they asked with courage and honesty. Their myths don't shy away from life's harshness. Death is real, inevitable, and impartial. This existential realism is refreshing, even today. The Sumerians also celebrated life. Beer, music, love, friendship, achievement. They weren't pessimistic. They were realistic optimists, building and creating despite mortality. Their legacy is everywhere, invisible but foundational. Every contract, every law, every written word, every hour of the day, Sumerian echoes. They didn't conquer the world through military force. They conquered it through ideas, innovations, and systems. And those conquests are permanent. Part 10. Mysteries and Unanswered Questions. Despite over a century of archaeology, many Sumerian mysteries remain. Who exactly were the Sumerians, and where did they come from? They spoke a language unrelated to any other known language and isolate. Their physical features, based on art, don't clearly match any modern group. Some theories suggest they migrated from the east, perhaps from the Iranian plateau. Others suggest they were indigenous to southern Mesopotamia, evolving in place. Genetic studies of modern populations offer clues, but no definitive answers. The Sumerians themselves had myths of origins from the sea or from the east. The mystery of their origins may never be fully solved. Why did the Sumerians develop writing when and where they did? Many factors converged: complex economy, trade, large populations, centralized administration. But why Sumer and not somewhere else? Writing also emerged independently in Egypt, China, and Mesoamerica. Was there something universal about certain conditions that sparked writing? Or was it pure chance, unique circumstances that happened to align in Sumer first? What caused the collapse of the UR3 state? The Elamite invasion was the immediate cause, but deeper factors were at play. Climate change, specifically increased aridity, may have stressed agricultural systems. Salinization of fields from centuries of irrigation reduced crop yields. Over-centralization made the system brittle, unable to adapt to shocks. All these factors together may explain the collapse, but the exact sequence and relative importance remain debated. What happened to the royal attendants buried in the royal cemetery of UR? Did they volunteer for death, or were they coerced? No signs of violence appear on the skeletons, suggesting willing participation or poison. Some scholars suggest religious ecstasy or drugs dulled fear and pain. Others propose these attendants believed they'd serve their rulers in the afterlife, a privilege. The truth, lost in time, remains haunting and mysterious. Why did Sumerian become a dead language? Languages die when speakers stop using them. But why did Sumerian stop? Akkadian speakers were more numerous and politically dominant. Bilingualism may have transitioned to Akkadian monolingualism over generations, but the exact social dynamics are unclear. How much of Sumerian culture was lost when the language died? How many oral traditions, jokes, idioms, and subtleties vanished? Written texts preserve much, but they can't capture everything. What did Sumerian music actually sound like? We have instruments, images, and text describing music. But musical notation, as we know it, didn't exist. Reconstructions have been attempted, but they're educated guesses. The actual melodies, rhythms, and harmonies remain unknown. How much has been lost to time? Mud brick structures erode, tablets crumble with rots. Textiles, leather, and papyrus rarely survive. What percentage of Sumerian literature has been recovered? Probably a small fraction, perhaps 5 or 10%. Libraries burned, cities were abandoned, tablets were recycled. Every translation opens new questions. Sumerian is difficult, with complex grammar and ambiguous syntax. Scholars debate translations, meanings, and interpretations. Every tablet adds to our knowledge, but also reveals how much we don't know. What was daily life really like? Texts give us economic, religious, and legal details, but they rarely describe emotions, thoughts, or mundane experiences. Did children play in the streets? Did couples argue? Did friends laugh over beer? We assume yes, but we can't know for certain. Why did some city-states thrive while others declined? Geography, resources, leadership, and luck all played roles, but the specific factors determining success are often unclear. What were relationships between city-states like beyond warfare? Did citizens of UR visit Uruk? Did merchants gossip about foreign politics? Did people feel loyalty to their city or to Sumer as a whole? These social dynamics are hinted at but rarely explicit. How much did ordinary Sumerians know about their own history? Kings and priests preserved texts, but did common people know ancient myths? Education was limited to elites, so popular knowledge remains uncertain. What did Sumerians think about their place in the world? They saw themselves as chosen by the gods, the center of civilization. Beyond their borders were barbarians, uncivilized peoples. But did they ever question this worldview? Did anyone wonder if other peoples had different but valid ways of life? Texts suggest ethnocentrism, but individual thoughts remain hidden. What caused the Bronze Age collapse around 1200 BCE? This event postdated Sumer, but it affected the broader region. Mesopotamian civilization continued, but many societies collapsed. Theories include invasions, climate change, and systems collapse. The truth is likely a combination, but specifics are debated. How much of Sumerian mythology influenced later religions beyond what we know? Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all have roots in the Near East. How many Sumerian ideas, subtly transformed, survived into these traditions? Concepts of sin, redemption, divine justice. Do they have Sumerian precursors? The question is fascinating and difficult to answer definitively. What will future discoveries reveal? New tablets are found every year. Technologies like satellite imagery reveal buried cities. DNA analysis may solve the mystery of Sumerian origins. Each discovery reshapes our understanding. The Sumerians are gone, but they keep surprising us. Part 11. Reflections on Sumerian Achievements. It's worth pausing to appreciate the sheer audacity of what the Sumerians achieved. They lived over 4,000 years ago in a harsh environment with no natural advantages. No forests, no stone quarries, no metal ores. Just mud, reeds, and the two rivers. From this, they built civilization. They created cities where none had existed. They invented writing without any precedent to guide them. They developed mathematics, astronomy, law, literature, and art. They did this not in isolation, but through collaboration, trade, and cultural exchange. Sumerian civilization wasn't the work of lone geniuses. It was a collective achievement of thousands of people over centuries. Farmers who tilled the soil, scribes who copied texts, priests who maintained temples, merchants who risked their lives on trade routes, soldiers who defended walls, potters, weavers, musicians, builders, each contributed. This collective effort is what made civilization possible. The Sumerians understood something profound. Humans are stronger together. Specialization allowed expertise. Trade allowed resource access. Law allowed trust. Cities allowed concentration of talent and resources. This insight, that organization multiplies human potential, changed history. The Sumerians also understood the importance of memory. They wrote things down, preserving knowledge across generations. Each generation didn't start from scratch. They inherited accumulated wisdom. This is the essence of civilization, intergenerational transmission of knowledge. Animals teach their young survival skills, but humans teach everything: language, stories, techniques, values. The Sumerians systematized this teaching, creating schools and texts. They valued knowledge, respected expertise, and honored teachers. Modern society, with all its complexity, rests on the Sumerian foundation. The Sumerians also embraced beauty. Their art wasn't purely functional. It was expressive, symbolic, moving. The lyre with the golden bull's head, the intricate cylinder seals, the poetry of Enheduanna. They knew that life isn't just survival. It's also meaning, beauty, joy. They celebrated life through festivals, music, and feasts. They drank beer, told stories, and honored their gods. They lived fully, aware of mortality, but not paralyzed by it. The Sumerians were pragmatic and spiritual, realistic and idealistic. They built canals and temples, wrote contracts and hymns. They were merchants and mystics, warriors and poets. This balance, practical and profound, is perhaps their greatest legacy. The Sumerians faced challenges we still face: resource scarcity, conflict, inequality, mortality. They responded with ingenuity, organization, and creativity. They didn't solve all problems, but they created frameworks for addressing them. Law instead of vendetta, trade instead of theft, writing instead of forgetting. These frameworks, refined over millennia, still structure our world. The Sumerians were, in a sense, the first modern people. They worried about taxes, obeyed laws, went to work, raised children. They argued with neighbors, fell in love, grieved losses, celebrated victories. They were human in all the ways we are. Reading their texts, complaints, love poems, prayers, we recognize ourselves. For 1,000 years separate us, but the gap feels small. Emotions, desires, fears, these are constant across time. The Sumerians remind us that humanity is one story, stretching across ages. We're part of that story, inheritors of their achievements. Every time we write, we honor Sumerian scribes. Every time we seek justice, we honor Yuarnama's code. Every time we tell a story, we honor the author of Gilgamesh. We are, all of us, Sumerian descendants in spirit. Their innovations became universal, transcending their culture. Writing isn't Sumerian anymore. It's human. Law, cities, schools, trade, all human, not Sumerian. The Sumerians gave these gifts to the world, and the world transformed them into something larger. This is the nature of great civilizations. They give more than they take. The Sumerians gave humanity tools to build the future, and we're still using those tools today. Like satellite imagery, reveal buried cities. DNA analysis may solve the mystery of Sumerian origins. Each discovery reshapes our understanding. The Sumerians are gone, but they keep surprising us. Part 12. Final thoughts and conclusion. As we reach the end of this journey, let's reflect on what we've learned. The Sumerians weren't mythical. They were real people who lived, worked, loved, and died. They faced challenges, made choices, and built something enduring. They transformed the human condition from prehistory to history. Before Sumer, humanity had language, tools, and simple societies. After Sumer, humanity had cities, writing, law, and complex civilizations. This transformation happened in a few centuries, a blink in evolutionary time. The Sumerians weren't superhuman. They were human, fully and wonderfully. Their achievements came from cooperation, intelligence, and persistence. They didn't have technology we'd recognize. No electricity, no engines, no computers. Just human minds and hands, working together. That's what makes their achievements so inspiring. They prove what's possible with collective human effort. We honor them by remembering, by studying, by appreciating. Their cities are ruins now, their language dead, their gods forgotten. But their ideas live on, woven into the fabric of civilization. Every law code, every contract, every written word is a Sumerian echo. We live in a world they helped create. Our debt to them is immeasurable, and yet they're largely forgotten outside academic circles. Most people don't know who the Sumerians were or what they achieved. This video aimed to change that, even if just a little. Now you know. You know about Uruk's walls, Inanna's descent, Gilgamesh's quest. You know about cuneiform tablets, ziggurats, and beer rations. You know that civilization didn't spring fully formed. It was built, slowly and carefully, by countless hands over many generations. And it continues to be built. We are, in our own way, still Sumerians, writing, building, questioning, creating. The work they started hasn't ended. It continues in every act of writing, every law passed, every city built. We're their heirs, whether we know it or not. So as you go about your day, remember them. Remember the scribes pressing wedges into clay. Remember the farmers maintaining irrigation canals. Remember the priests climbing ziggurat steps. Remember the merchants traveling dangerous roads. Remember the poets composing hymns. They lived, they mattered, and they shaped our world. That's the truth about the Sumerians. Not myths or legends, but real people with real achievements. People who looked at a harsh world and decided to transform it. People who asked big questions and sought answers. People who built, created, and dreamed. People like us. Thank you for joining this journey through Sumerian history. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share. Knowledge is meant to be spread, just as the Sumerians believed. May your nights be restful, your mind at peace, and your curiosity always alive. Good night, and remember the Sumerians.